The concepts and dramatics of Star Trek the original series were, in some ways, ahead of their time. Obviously, the budget of the show could not possibly support those ideals. But Star Trek also represents, and I'm not very well educated on the matter, I'd say the end of an era in movie making, the glamorous age of science fiction. What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking Flash Gordon here. We're talking the era of spaceships that had smoke coming out of them. They had very silvery, shiny stuff. Flying saucers were kind of sort of aging out at that time as far as popular fiction on television. And all the kind of classic elements that created the early era of science fiction in Hollywood were becoming refined by the next generation of special effects movie makers and such. And so when Star Trek made the leap to the big screen in 1979, a lot of the cheese and the cheapness of the TV series, which in many ways was unavoidable, went out the door, and they made way for a more serious and more dramatic universe, albeit one that we were still familiar with. And while in my review of the TOS Black Handle Phaser, I mentioned that it's a very utilitarian device, I also intentionally and very clearly use the word ray gun because it does come from that golden age of science fiction from the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And so, of course, when a handheld weapon was needed in the movies, the design of the phaser got a bit of an upgrade as well. And we got the refined and streamlined version of the phaser. This replica, made by Diamond Select Toys, made its debut in the 1982 film Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Lies! This phaser actually made its debut in 1979 in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Hello! Thanks for that one, Diamond Select Toys. I appreciate it. But regardless, it was featured prominently in Star Trek II, the acronym of which comes out to be TWoK. I'm not kidding when I say this phaser is very streamlined. There's no panel details. Yeah, there's screw hole covers, which, by the way, I really like those. But very streamlined, very smooth, very, I can't really say Art Deco because it doesn't have the sharp edges on it, but still, you know, very nicely done. All the silver you see here has been painted on. Something weird, though, they use, not in the Star Trek context, but they use holographic decals along the side here. I think the reason, it's kind of weird, but I think the reason they did it is so that it would hide the separation lines, because you can see the separation line right there continues on. I think that's why they put that there as opposed to painting it a lighter kind of metallic silver color. But anyways, majority of the detail is on the front and, you know, obviously on top where all the action takes place. Smooth and refined, yet very simple to operate at the same time. And you can always turn it like that. Now, on the other hand, you can also hold it down and it will turn itself off like that way. I actually do it that way to save power, so it doesn't have to spend that extra power on the beep. But anyways, these two lights will always flash independently regardless of what you're doing. There are a number of features built into this. The first one is the safety feature. These are the power settings over here, and obviously they're not lit right now. And what happens is, because it's kind of in standby mode right now, so if I pull the trigger, it's not going to shoot. So what you do is you use the settings selection button over here. Now we're in light stun mode. Don't know why it's called light stun, but I guess it is. And this is what light stun looks like. Okay, simple enough. Next is the full stun. And you'll notice that it starts here, works its way up. And the standard stun works like this. Next is kill. See how it goes up, 2, 3. And kill looks like this. And last but not least is disintegrate, which goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And disintegrate looks like this. And the speaker is located right there. So you don't really have to worry about covering up the speaker, although you can, because this little tab here, which oddly is not on the actual props, this little tab helps to locate your finger. And you press it again and it puts it into safe mode again. Very simple to operate. The sound effects that have just come out of here for kill and disintegrate, you actually hear those in the movie. They don't use stun or light stun. I didn't know there was a light stun. I know there's burn, there's stun, there's kill, there's disintegrate. Disintegrate, vaporize, same thing, blah, blah, blah. One feature, however, that you do not see in any of the movies, however, they do use it once in a great while in the series, is the overload feature. You press this and you squeeze the trigger at the same time. We are now in overload mode. There is no way of aborting overload mode once you turn it on. So when it does this, you're kind of screwed. Can't change it, can't turn it off. The only way you can get out of this is to blow it up by pulling the trigger. And it will do this. Now, of course, Diamond Select Toys has had to make up a couple of the sound effects for this. The overload sound, the turn on, the turn off, the stun settings, they kind of had to guess with that. So if you listen closely enough and if you know it well enough, you can actually hear the Star Trek II transporter sound effect in there as well. Listen. Listen. I'll tell you when. So, yeah, they had to make up a few things, but hey, I'm not concerned. The sounds that come out of this are pretty good. Although the kind of medium stun or whatever it is sounds like a snake hissing, and it also runs longer. But, those are just picks. Now here's something that's kind of interesting. A lot of people don't realize this, mostly because it didn't appear in the movie, but this Type 2 phaser is actually capable of converting into a Type 1 phaser. Now, the Type 1 phaser operates along more or less the same lines. The only difference is, as opposed to the on-off switch from the Type 2, you just use the selection mode button here. This serves as your on-off button. Now, you're going to have to hold it down in order to turn it off. Because if you just press it real quickly, you're just selecting modes again. And the trigger, unlike the TOS version, there is no trigger down here. By the way, battery compartment 3 LR44s right there. The trigger is actually this button up here. It's actually, it's weird. This is a single piece, but it's divided in half. I don't know why. It was very simple, very small. It fits easily enough in your hand, and you don't have to. With the original one, you had to hold it kind of weird. With this one, you can actually grip it from the side and use your thumb to pull the trigger as opposed to pushing some little button down here. So it's a lot easier to work with it there. This also has the overload setting for it, which the Diamond Select Toys TOS phaser could not. You hold down both of these, and you get overload setting, which again, the only way you can turn it off is to that's actually kind of a badass sound. So that's the Type 1 phaser. Putting them back together is effortless. See all these studs right here. By the way, just like the TOS phaser, this has the battery which runs both halves. This is completely dependent on the batteries in this. And you can see the contact points right there, which actually stick out a little bit. Anyways, what the cool part is, this is held onto this with a magnet. When you put it back together, it does that. So it'll hold very snugly. The other thing is there's a little tab just ahead of the battery door which fits into there. So once you get it in, you can lock it solidly in place by simply pushing down until it snaps. And that's it. That's everything this phaser can do. There's one or two little things that bug me about this phaser. The reflective decals along the side, that it has a little stub sitting on the front there. There's a crap load of visible screw hole covers, which, by the way, the TOS phaser had only 2 screw holes visible on the whole damn thing. Well, you know, it had one on the bottom of the Type 1, but And those are relatively little things. But the one thing, I don't know why, it just kind of drives me nuts, is you can hear the trigger click very clearly when you pull on it and when you let go, okay? Listen. You hear that click? Now notice, it's set to kill right now. I'm squeezing the trigger right now, and that sound has not gone off yet. It is not, and here's the thing that's bugged me. It's not until you let go that it actually goes off. What's up with that? That's weird. Most toys that I can think of, every toy I own that's a role-play handheld weapon like this, usually you pull the trigger, it goes off. This is the first one I've ever owned where you have to let go in order for it to go off. And there's no power-up, you know, there's no reach. There's none of that. It just, you have to let go in order for it to go off. That is so strange. And really that is the biggest problem that I have with this toy. Well, I say toy. Yeah, kids can actually handle this thing and rough it up and all those things. It's not really going to get damaged. I wouldn't call it as durable as your average toy, but it is definitely a very, 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 very well-designed, very well-made replica. And, if I'm not much mistaken, this is the first version of this phaser from TMP and TWoK that has the separating Type 2, or the separating Type 1. It's never done that before. Now, artwork, and indeed the props, do have this separation line running around them, but you never saw them in the movies, which, okay, that's fine. But it's very easy to use, it's very simple to understand. Other than, setting the overload and figuring out what these 2 buttons on top are, very, very easy to understand. There's literally nothing difficult about this thing. It just is. Now, I mentioned briefly earlier that this appeared in the motion picture, TMP. The only difference, as far as I'm aware, between the TWoK version and the TMP version is that these lights, all the lights actually, were, one was green, one was yellow, one was blue, one was red, I think one was gold. There may have been a yellow in there as well. But the TWoK version that you see right here did actually have these lights here like this. They might have been a little bit of gold, and I think there might have been another flashing thing up here. I'd have to watch the film again. I haven't seen it for a couple months. But this is more or less accurate to what you see in TWoK, The Wrath of Khan. The TMP version, you see a random guard just standing there holding it, I think, once in the whole movie. And by the way, that armor that they have for TMP and TWoK, that's kind of awesome because they are like the first Starfleet security personnel to ever wear armor. They haven't worn armor since. So it's nice that security personnel, even if they're not wearing red anymore, have a little bit of protection to them. Their pants are still ugly, though, especially in TMP. Ugh, I am so glad they changed those uniforms. So, honestly, I can't think of anything else to say. This is one of my favorite designs. Not just because, hey, I actually have it in my hands now, trademark information, by the way, but because it genuinely is one of my favorite designs. The problem I had with the TOS version is it kind of stuck out in weird places, kind of awkward, whatever it is. And even though this has a little more flash to it, it's still an effective weapon. And really, that was kind of the whole point of Gene Roddenberry's ideals of the future, is he had to have a weapon available for the actors to use, but look as little as a gun as possible. The TOS version, it was a ray gun. It looked like a ray gun, but this looks like a barcode scanner, you know? It really does. It looks like a barcode scanner. So, you know, who's going to suspect that this thing's going to kill you? No one, really. In Star Trek 3, they made a phaser that looked a little more like the TOS version. And then for Star Trek 5 and 6, we got the badass assault phaser, which, Diamond Select Toys, please, please, pretty please, I beg of thee. But it is interesting to note, as you can see from this picture, with the 2009 reboot, the classic shape of the phaser never changes when it comes to TOS. When Star Trek The Next Generation came out, it was this flimsy magic wand of death, which they tried refining a couple of times, and it was actually uncomfortable for the actors to hold on to those things. So the classic phaser, in a way, is timeless, because, well, it still works. And you know what, that's just fine with me, because the phaser look, that is the weapon of the future, folks. You know, even though it did make its debut in Star Trek The Motion Picture, this set comes from Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, so I just gotta play that theme song by James Horner, which is awesome sauce. This is Abe Unit 4A for CollectionDX.com, signing off.